last moment of life, you have to speak in communal terms, because that's the only language that God knows. The only language God knows is community, communion, Eucharist. It's a wonderful insight of that gospel. So I'd like to talk a little bit tonight with those high thoughts in the background. I'd like to talk about the potential of this Catholic imagination for young people, a young generation of people. They're a great generation of people. They're known largely about their positive thinking. There's nothing that drives young Catholics crazy than listening to older Catholics get nasty and negative about things. You know, sometimes boomer Catholics moan and worry, and they say, well, you know, things aren't the way they used to be. It's not going in the right direction. And young people get very, very frustrated because they're positive thinkers. They like positive thinking. And they're also interested in, and some people would be obsessed with, social connection. I was at a retreat house not long ago. I was over here talking to some friars, and there's a whole group of teenagers on the next table over. And they were all texting. And they were all texting each other. But they were connected. They loved to connect with one another. For all that, they are confounding the church. They're mystifying the church. Because they are a generation, largely, who show a significant disinterest in institutionalized, established religions. Statistics are showing that we have a generation of young adults between the ages of 17 and 40 who are the most irreligious generation in the history of humankind. That is, they are dramatically less likely to affiliate with a religious community, less likely to participate in worship services than any generation before. Unlike previous generations that went to church and then stopped going to church, this is the generation that's not even going to church to begin with. While they claim to be spiritual, they show definite disregard and misgiving about religion and what it has to offer individuals and communities. And I'd like to propose a thesis to you, for you tonight to think about. It's a thesis. It might be right. It might be wrong. It's a thesis that may offer a new point of conversation between us and them, one that takes seriously the questions they're asking themselves. It's a thesis that suggests that Catholics have not been able to reach this generation, especially the women in it, because our questions are not their questions. And our major concerns are not their major concerns. They inherit another agenda, another set of concerns, and different styles and presuppositions. I want to propose tonight that we can entice this new generation with a Catholic imagination if we don't make our political questions theirs. We must give a new generation of Catholics the space they need to take up the Catholic imagination in a way that will help them create new pathways and experiences for themselves. Let me flesh this out a little bit. I'm going to have to go back a little bit. The Catholic imagination is an imagination of goodness and It's about that connection between humanity and divinity. It's a gritty connection between life. Catholics are convinced that gritty connection with life is the seedbed of the new creation that Jesus is going to establish when death is destroyed once and for all. Catholics are not trying to escape from this world. We're not just trying to get to heaven. That's not our theology. We believe in the new creation of heaven and earth. So let me say this in non-theological language. Catholics like getting their hands dirty. We're always trying to find possibility and opportunity, making new life, making connections between husbands and wives, the rich and the poor, those who are searching and those who are finding. Our Catholic imagination is suffused with one word that the great Protestant theologian Karl Barth really disliked about us. He was asked, what is it that you don't like about Catholics? And he said it's one word. It's the word and. And. Very simple. Catholics like talking about heaven and earth, faith and reason, nature and grace. Catholics love connections. And we love to make our faith real and to take it to the streets to make things happen. Our Catholic imagination just doesn't store up our treasures in heaven. We want to express them on earth. We're constantly turning our charity into institutions, great and effective institutions that do great things for millions of people each and every day around the world, whether you're Catholic or not. Let me go back and just remind you of how we did it here in America. I'm going to talk about 3 generations of Catholics. The first generation of Catholics is what I call the builder generation of Catholics. They came largely as immigrants to this country, to a land that was generally hostile to Catholics. Certainly in the Northeast, Catholics weren't accepted by the Puritans with open arms. We were not well accepted here. Our great Catholic ancestors came with 2 main goals. They wanted to defend the faith in an alien land, and secondly, move a generation of Catholics up and out of disadvantage as quickly as possible. And it's amazing that our Catholic ancestors were extremely focused on this. They had a unified mission about this. This is what they wanted to do, defend the faith, but move a generation of Catholics up and out of disadvantage as quickly as possible. And in the end, they were amazingly successful. They built the largest and most successful private school system, from grammar schools to colleges and universities, the world had ever known. And for those who were vulnerable, those who were living under harsh conditions, that always attend the poor and the immigrant, that did not have a social safety net before America had social safety nets, the Catholic Church built the largest and most effective network of charity organizations, from hospitals to orphanages to nursing homes to assisted living centers, from the Knights of Columbus to St. Vincent de Paul societies, all across this country. We built institutions of enormous care all across this country, not simply for the benefit of Catholics, but to the benefit of all our brothers and sisters who are American. This was Catholic imagination at its best. Love defined in institutions, from universities to soup kitchens to orphanages, from primary schools to healthcare centers. We were showing the world that we were a loving people who believed in a God who came close to us in concrete forms of compassion. This great generation of builders did amazing work. And they did it well. And we should bless them every day. Well, they were followed by the boomer generation of Catholics who inherited these institutions of faith and justice. And their task was a little bit different. Their task was to sustain the faith that was handed on to them and to offer opportunities through these institutions, through these structures of charity and justice, and extend them further and more deeply into the core of the American enterprise with the opportunities that faith and freedom provided. The boomer generation was to build on the strong platform that the builder generation had created. And how amazing it is that 6 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices today are Catholic. That would have astounded, surprised, bowled over. No matter what you think of their politics, it would have surprised our ancestors that they had emerged so successfully. For both builders and boomers, there was an apparent fit between what they needed and what they wanted from the American experience and the Catholic imagination. They needed an education, and the church provided it, with first-rate schools from primary all the way up to university. They needed a social safety net when there was none, when America could not protect the poor and vulnerable. And the church provided great institutions of care, from hospitals to St. Vincent de Paul societies. And we know that it was largely women religious who built those. For all its internal tensions, Catholics have gotten along well with the American dream. And the American dream has been well in the American context. But something is going awry. Something new is happening. We're having an increasingly difficult time making it in America. And young people are finding it increasingly hard to see how religion helps them. We know it in our families, and we know it in our parishes. Young people are not totally, but largely missing in action on Sunday morning. Even young adults who are brought up carefully in the faith, attending Catholic schools all the way up to high school and college, even they are simply walking away in record numbers from the practice of the faith. And they're doing so without shame or drama, and without any intention of coming back when they have kids of their own. What's going on? Why is this happening? It's a complex and a heart-rending question that I think a lot of Catholic families are trying to figure out. So let me offer some thoughts. When looking at the migration of young adult Catholics away from the practice of the faith, many have suggested that it's a question of ideology and identity. That is, some commentators hold that Catholics are just losing their faith. That Catholics don't know who they are because they don't know what they believe, and because of this, they don't know how to act as Catholics in the 21st century. I question that premise. I don't think that the central problem of our time is one of belief. In fact, recent studies about beliefs and behaviors indicate that among Catholics there may be changes in attitudes and behavior, but the core beliefs remain the same. then Catholics, whether they're going to church or not going to church, continue to believe in the existence of God. They still believe in the resurrection of Jesus. They still believe that Mary is the Mother of God. They still believe in helping the poor, and they still believe in the sacraments. All the core beliefs remain the same. Something else is going on, and I think what it is a growing misalignment between what Catholics expect from church and what Catholics are getting from church. Young people are experiencing different needs, are facing very different challenges in their world than previous generations. And unlike their predecessors, they don't find the church responding to their needs and their questions and their concerns with the intensity and with the institutions that previous generations were offered. There was a time when Catholic expectation and Catholic experience aligned, and Catholic researchers call that an experience of religious well-being. But for almost 40 years, there's been a growing disconnect between what priests and people understand as legitimate pastoral needs. And I think that strain is what we're experiencing in a younger generation. Catholics are trying to negotiate what they've always tried to negotiate: love and family, jobs and careers, sickness and health, greed and generosity. But they do so now in a postmodern society, trying to use the ecclesial institutions and resources at hand. Catholics are changing, but their institutions are also changing. The question we face is whether our Catholics and our institutions are changing in the same direction or parting ways. Both the builder and the boomer generations benefited from their relationship to the Catholic Church. These two generations saw the Catholic imagination put to use to advance their family concerns, their personal ambitions, and their common good. For the builders, the Catholic imagination allowed them to claim a foothold on the American dream, to protect their faith, and move up with amazing speed into the middle class and beyond. The Catholic imagination allowed them to assimilate, to accommodate to the American dream. Boomer Catholics saw how they could sustain the faith handed on to them, and at the same time build community across the great divides. But things have changed dramatically in the pastoral relationship with the new generation of young adult Catholics, 22 to 40. It's my contention that they can't see us in their lives. They can't feel our pastoral love. They can't get how the church helps them make it in their lives. We've yet to understand deeply enough the concerns that they have, which are different from ours. And we have not translated those concerns into institutions that help them. This generation of young adult Catholics has a new set of challenges in front of them, and I think they have to do with two overwhelming realities. What I call the reinvention of work in America and the untested rules governing a new economy. To have a relationship with young adults starts with understanding the landscape of their lives and how it's changed and being rearranged by unprecedented economic forces. America has already moved from identified by the parish you belong to, even if you were Jewish. You identified yourself that I belong to St. Patrick's Church. That's the way it was. Ourselves by our careers. Our careers are now what push and move and shape us. We used to belong to a largely relational culture that once placed a high priority on family and faith. And we've now moved to a global work culture that placed a high priority and heavy price on work and one's career above all else. Young people are watching as the old economic rules are being reworked for the benefit of a shrinking minority of Americans. They're living their young adult lives with increasing obligations, shrinking benefits, fewer guarantees. There may be some of you in this room who remember a time when, if you got a job, you could stay in that job, make it a career. If you were good to the business, they were good to you. If you worked hard, did the right thing, you could make that your career and end your life with a pension from that job. Those days are gone. More likely, we will have not just one job, two jobs, three jobs. You're going to have multiple careers. And it's your responsibility to get to where the company intends to get to, even if they don't tell you. These are incredibly difficult economic changes that are going on, and that young people have somehow have to intuit. What's surprising after the Great Recession of 2008, what's surprising people is that not even a college education, and maybe not even a master's degree, are sure bets or guarantee for employment in America. Public religion researcher at Georgetown University recently asked millennials what their greatest concerns were. 76% of them said unemployment, finding a job. If you asked that question about 30 or 40 years ago, it would have been love, marriage, sex. Their second greatest concern, now you may be thinking, okay, the second concern is going to be sex, right? The second greatest concern, future economic problems, addressing the federal deficit. With jobs and careers becoming more and more of a gamble, young people are putting off their commitments. They're delaying decisions about love and marriage, family and careers, settling down well into their 30s. Not necessarily because they want to. Those of you in this room who are parents know what that means. They're coming back. They're coming back to your houses. And many of them are looking for cash. Marriage has become most vulnerable in the heartland of America, in the conservative middle part of the country. That's what the research is saying out of the University of Virginia. It's not. Marriage is not vulnerable on the wacky coast where I live and you live. It's more vulnerable in the middle conservative part of the country because of uncertainty, diversity, fluidity. It's a new study out of Chapman University in Singapore of what's called an era of post-familialism. What researchers are beginning to find is that we're entering a time period of beyond the family, where 30% of people in Asian countries now don't want families. They don't want families, they don't want marriage. Research out of the University of Virginia showed for the first time about 5 years ago, parents beginning to report that marriage and family makes them unhappy. That children are a burden too hard to bear. I'm not a parent. I know they're a burden. They're a lot of hard work. But for the first time, people are reporting that it's hard work not worth the burden of it. The sad fact is that the important decisions of young Catholics, those about sexuality, marriage, friends, careers, children, are happening out of the reach of congregations. Partly because our youth programs have a shelf life that go only to confirmation. Beyond that, most parishes have very little to attract or to entice or to help young people into their 20s and 30s. How many parishes have vibrant premarital programs? I mean, I know for myself, it took about 8 to 10 years to get me to look like this without the gray hair. 10 years of formation. And I only have to get myself out of bed in the morning. But for parents who have to get the kids out of bed in the morning, what do they get? 3 nights of pre-K. Wow. It just, there's something's out of balance here. Because our institutions of support no longer match up to the developmental needs of our young adults, this generation is choosing what's called a more improvisational style of relating to religion and to everything else. They're not interested in the polarized debates of boomer Catholics. You know, boomer Catholics love, well, it's either liberal or conservative. Boom, boom. Red state, blue state. I was a vice rector of a seminary out east, and we were literally having blue hymnal versus red hymnal fights. The red hymnals had the conservative hymns. The blue hymnals had the supposedly progressive hymns. There were seminarians who would only sing from the red hymnals. There were only seminarians who would sing out of the blue hymnals. Red hymnals, blue hymnals. Sweet Lord. So let me put the ecclesial dilemma in succinct form. When the builder generation needed to defend the faith, they were given educational institutions. When they needed social safety nets, they were given institutions of care. They were given hospitals, nursing homes, orphanages, St. Vincent de Paul societies. And so let me ask the obvious question. When 2 successive generations of younger boomer, post-boomer Catholics ask about jobs and employment, the state of the economy, how they're going to make it with the burden of debt that they're coming into, know that one party in the marriage is coming with $100,000 worth of debt, the other side is coming with $100,000 worth of debt, $200,000 debt to start with. It takes $267,000 to get a kid from 0 to 17 before you even add in the cost of an education, and hopefully now you're going to have to put in some money for your retirement, right? Because the government's not going to take care of you. And so this is what young people are facing. So with the burden of debt that they're likely to inherit as a result of the unfunded military and social liabilities we have accumulated, the rampant spending, the rising tax cuts we have endorsed, what has been the response of dioceses and churches? In the face of this reality facing young people today, what has the church done to help? And I think this is the problem. Young people are saying, I don't know how you're helping me. I don't know how you're helping me to make sense of my life and helping me to get through to a redemption. The fact is that modern economics has some of you will say, what does economics have to do with religion? What are you as a priest talking about economics? Get away from it, stay away from it, it's evil, let somebody else talk about it. But the reality is that modern day economics has profound consequences on people's spiritual lives. A few years ago I wrote a book on Franciscan economics. Those of you think that we're just bird baths. Maybe cookie jars, a little bird here. That Franciscans are kind of like pie in the sky kind of guys. But the reality is when we were founded, for the great part of the Middle Ages, Franciscans were thinking about, because we took it out of poverty, we were thinking about money all the time. We were thinking about new ways of doing money. We wrote some of the major books, scholarly treatises on economics in the Middle Ages. So I wrote a book on Franciscan economics. And as I said last night, what I see happening in contemporary economics is that it is draining the transcendent desire that we have for God. The natural impulse that we have to reach for the God beyond all things. We are substituting that in modern, capitalistic, aggressive forms of capitalism with a commercial desire, saying, forget about the infinity of God. We'll give you the infinity of goods instead. It feels better that way. And people buy it. When young people look around the world at the winners and losers in this brutal economic game being played, and when they question the structures of power and privilege that lead to this crisis of desire that they're feeling, are we as Catholics listening to them? Or are we becoming just another one of those social institutions that leaves them disappointed and disillusioned? In the end, I think we will be able to reach young people if we stop imposing what we think are the questions they should be worried about and start listening to the kinds of fears that they have, like our ancestors did when we wanted to protect our faith, when we needed social safety nets. Let me try one more thing. I know I'm trying to be patient tonight. Another reality I think we have to address, if we're going to evangelize properly, is the situation of women in the church. The first thing that has to be said is that the working relationship between priests and women has been about the most solid, satisfying, engaging, and effective we've had since the Second Vatican Council. One of the most tangible benefits of the Vatican Council has been the introduction of competent, caring, educated, spiritual women into our pastoral lives. They provided insight, perspective, intelligence, creativity, compassion, balance, and a distinct attunement to the practicalities of life. I know in the Archdiocese of Boston, where I am, it wasn't for the women, after the scandals and the reconfiguration of churches, the Archdiocese would have collapsed. They showed themselves to be sturdy wisdom figures in a difficult time. But there's research now showing something that we ignore to our peril. We have two generations, Generation X and millennials, women 17 to 50, who are showing, well, people in that age group show up behind neglect of religion to begin with. But there's something in those numbers which is even more frightening. We know that up until now, women have been most likely to join churches and to be involved in parishes. They've traditionally been more orthodox in their beliefs, more devoted to the practice of the faith. And in study after study, you as women, when asked, define themselves as very spiritual, as having read the scriptures, as having had an experience of God. Across the board, over many years, women have always exhibited a greater commitment to and involvement with and belief in religion. Until now. The fact that women between the ages of 17 and 50 are now more alienated from their faith, less orthodox in their beliefs, and less likely to practice their faith than men their same age. This has never happened before. We've never seen this among women before. If the process of feminine alienation continues, or if it accelerates among women 17 to 50, we may likely witness an exponential diminishment in sacramental activity for which we are not prepared. Young women are eager for enduring signs that their concerns are being treated with dignity and in an atmosphere of mutual respect. Women today are leaders in their families, they're leaders in their businesses and civic communities, but they cannot and they will not cross the thresholds of our parishes and will not engage with us if we treat them with a subtext of inferiority or invisibility. Parish programs have to be calibrated specifically and intelligently to the pastoral concerns of women, all across the developmental line. Let me give a methodology. I think we need a new dialogue with women. We need to listen carefully, very carefully, and maybe ask more questions. What's changed and changing in your experience as young women? Rather than having the church tell women what their experience is and what they should be worried about and what they should be concerned about, listen to what women tell us about what's changed and changing in their experience. And second, what do those changes mean to you? How do they affect you? What are the impact and consequences of those changes in your experience? And third, what direction should we move in to help you experience the fullness of life that Jesus came to offer you as women? What goals should we have? This is the moment of deep discernment, where we enter into a prayerful listening and dialogue with one another. And then fourth, what steps will get us where we want to go? Unfortunately, too often we get to the answer and say, these are the steps that are going to get us where we want to go, but we haven't done the prior work together. We've got the answers before we have the steps, before we have the dialogue.